So I guess we can get started. This is the compliance filing webinar for filling out the workbook for 2023 Massachusetts RPS, APS, CPS, and CES compliance. We'll just go through a few slides and then we'll go through the workbook itself. I'm John Wassam. I'm the RPS APS program manager at DOER. With me is Jason Brown of Mass DEP, who covers CES and CESE because those programs are overseen by Mass DEP. He'll also talk about, or Mass DEP will discuss the GHG form, which is also on the compliance workbook. Let's see, there we go. Whoops. The headers.
We just can't see.
Okay. This is the compliance process. Most of you may know it. We sent out bank certificates as DOER knows them in April. So you can use 2021 or 2022 bank certificates for compliance if you have them available to you. Just they do not show up in the GIS, and bank certificates for DOER are different than bank certificates in your GIS account. These certificates were settled in excess of compliance in those prior years, and now it's an accounting function at DOER to keep track of those bank certificates. But they were settled in those years, but they can be used for compliance for 2023, and as we'll discuss, 2022 could also be used for 2024 if you chose not to use them this year. We sent out the retail load obligation as we knew it in mid-May. You will have to use the number we sent out as your retail load obligation, the total. We are having discussions with a couple of suppliers because they're mismatch of asset IDs and whatnot. But we're in touch with those suppliers. And if you don't have any issues with your total obligation, then that's what you should use. It may differ slightly from what you see in GIS, but it's been determined that what is sent to us by the electric distribution companies is what we will use for the obligation. We'll get into wire instructions, or for the CES and CESC, any ACP credits on ACPO is due to Mass DEP, but RPS, APS, and CPS is due to Mass CEC. Those wire instructions, if you don't have them, will be emailed separately. I don't believe they have changed since last year, so if you have those instructions from last year, you can use those as well. And a reminder to fill out the GHG tab. This is required by all suppliers to complete for their AQ32 filing. So sometimes people miss that, but it's important to fill out the GHG tab as well. These are some of the important upcoming dates. The end of the trading year with GIS is June 15th at midnight. It's the same as every year. We are recommending that if you have ACPs for RPS, APS, or CPS, that you submit them to Mass CEC by Thursday, June 27th. So you can get a receipt back from SEC and provide that receipt when you file your compliance to DOER. And then, as I said, ACPs for CES and CESE go to Mass DEP, and they invoice those separately after the July 1st deadline. And the invoices are due 30 days of receipt of the invoice. And as always, July 1st is the deadline this year. July 1st is on a Monday, so compliance filings would be due by close of business Monday, July 1st. The other things that you send in with the completed workbook is the completed workbook. That's the first one. It's okay to sign the workbook electronically and to either scan the signatures and send them as a PDF, which is a lot of people do, or just sign them. That's tabs A and C on the authorization and certification of the workbook. You do not need to mail in the completed workbook any longer. We're accepting them just by email at the address below, doer.rps@mass.gov. With it, you should also send your GIS settlement report showing what you settled for your renewable certificates. As a reminder, you should do that a couple days or a few days after July 1st or June 15th, because not all the trades get captured and sometimes they're show a little short. So wait for everything to settle at GIS after the trading deadline and run the report then. If you have CPEX for the Clean Peak standard, that report is done separately at GIS, and you should run that one as well. And provide the ACP receipt from SEC if you had ACP, if you paid ACP. Next, these are the changes for this year. The load exemption for CESE has expired. There was a 2-year exemption period. That's no longer allowed per the regulations. So you won't find it on the workbook. You have to report your load obligation, whatever your total load obligation is, will be reported there as well. And just a reminder that the solar carve-out and solar carve-out 2 minimum standards went down slightly last year from what was originally published. There were a couple reasons. One is the wrong load obligation was used. It was actually higher in 2022. And there was an adjustment because we were collecting, the minimum standard was too high for solar carve-out 2. And it wasn't matching what was the number of certificates that were being generated by GIS. So it resulted in ACP being required by a lot of suppliers for that. So we've adjusted that. Just be aware that the numbers in the workbook are correct. And I believe they're published on the website as the correct number as well. We no longer require notarization as we used to, but that's been a couple of years now. Not necessary to send a hard copy. e-signature is acceptable. As we discussed, you can do the certification authorization. You can print that out, pages out, sign, scan it as a PDF back, and run the GIS reports a few days after June 15th. These are the banking limits. Nothing's really changed in this. You cannot bank CESE. That's the only one that's not bankable with us. And a reminder that CPS and CES bank certificates are not interchangeable. They must be used for their respective class. So if you have prior year CES bank certificates, they can only be used for CES. They cannot be used for RPS class 1 compliance. And a note that the CES banking limit is on the incremental amount, not on the total CES requirement, which I believe is 26% this year. And the RPS class 1 is 22%, although there's still an exemption, load exemption for load prior to 2019 and RPS class 1. So in general terms, the banking limit is only on that incremental 4% between the 26 and 22% of RPS class 1. Please be sure to settle all your renewable certificates in your Massachusetts sub-account by June 15th. They should not be settled in the reserve account. They should be settled in the Massachusetts sub-account. And then CPACs they're settled in their GS account, but it's a little separate from the other accounts. Please move any remitted auction certificates that you have to your compliance account. And we note that they should not be included in errant or banked. If you intend to bank this year, obviously, then you would include settled certificates over and above the minimum obligation. Any surplus certificates go to bank subject to the banking limit for each class. If you have voluntary certificates that you're not settling in the reserve account, you can report those on the green account. So those also would be settled in your sub-accounts with GIS. And then you report those on tab 15 for green. Those do get counted in a future year RGGI budget. We do report those plus reserve accounts for anything that is voluntary. They do get credited in RGGI. Yeah, then the two separate GIS reports we noted, one for CPEX if you have them, and one for everything else, called the My Certificates Disposition Report. And you should click on what is settled only. You don't need the other categories. And they should be sent as a CSV format to us. So make sure that those GIS reports are in that CSV format. The solar carve-out is ending. It ended in 2023 technically. So there will be no auction for SRECs this year. If you have SRECs, you should use them. There will be a minimal standard next year because we did have an auction and there were some ranked certificates, but it's very low for next year. And that would be the time that you would have to use up any eligible auction certificates or any remaining bank certificates that you have. We will hold an auction for SREC 2s, although I should note that SREC 2 is now starting to fade away. Some systems are transitioning to RPS Class 1 because they're losing their eligibility. The final year for that program, I believe, is 2027. So still have a time to go on SREC 2. They should be just a reminder that all remitted certificates remain in your main GIS account. If you put them in your sub account, they will be considered settled, and that may not be your intent. And a reminder again, don't put them in the banked columns. They go into the settled certificates, which is the first column in the workbook. This is just an explanation of SREC 2. It has 3 components. These haven't changed since last year. So if you had contracts before April 25th, 2014, they have a 0 minimum standard. If you have any supply contracts executed or extended after April 25th or before May 8th, 2016, they're subject to a lower minimum standard, and the final block, if you didn't have any exemptions, they would be equal to the 3.4149% minimum standard. So that's no change from earlier year. Just a reminder about the auction, any certificates that you were, or SREC 2s that you were considering placing in the auction must be made by June 15th. You can contact doer.srec for information on the auction. There's also information was sent out, and information is also available on the website. The auction will be held towards the end of July, but the certificates that you're placing in the auction must be there by June 15th. No changes there. A reminder on CES and RPS. Class 1 RECs also represent CES certificates and can be used for CES compliance. A reminder, banked RPS cannot be used for CES and vice versa. And the banking limit is only applied to the incremental, as we discussed before. A little bit about the clean energy standard existing.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry.
Hey, folks. Jason from Mass DEP. So as John was saying, CESE is our clean energy standing existing regulation. It has its own separate CESE generation certificates. So you won't be using RPS Class 1. And this new for this year, the minimum standard will be 26%. That's an increase from previous years, and you can seek our FAQ on the website to see the calculation for future years. Again, you can only use the CESE for certificates. And if you will be paying an ACP, the rate will remain the same. It's $10 per megawatt hour. And as John mentioned earlier, there's no banking and the previous load exemption has expired. So make sure you're accounting for that this year as well. Same thing John mentioned earlier for ACP payments for the RPS, APS, and CPS, Clean Peak standard. Those will be made to the Mass CEC, the Mass Clean Energy Center, and they'll be due by Thursday, June 27th. So you should get a receipt with that, and that can be sent in with the workbook to DOER. The wire instructions will be sent separately by Mass CEC in an encrypted email, so be on the lookout for that. And please make sure that you email a copy of tab N to Mass CEC when you're making the ACP payments for RPS, APS, and CPS. And again, there'll be a different payment process when you make an ACP payment for the CES and CESE process. The monies that are owed to Mass DEP for your CES and CESE ACP, you'll receive a separate invoice for Mass DEP. That'll come after the workbooks are filed, so sometime after July 1st, and you'll have 30 days from receiving the invoice to make that payment. If you look at table 16B in the workbook, it should calculate your total ACP payments under the CES and CESE. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to Mass DEP at climatestrategies@mass.gov. And I think we have Matthew on the line who's filling in for Sue Ann today. So Matthew, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the greenhouse gas portion of it.
Yeah, this is Matt from Mass DEP. I'm going to talk a little bit about the GHG tab of the DOER compliance workbook. The GHG, greenhouse gas reporting, is basically broken into two reports that occur about a year and a half apart from one another. The first report is the GHG tab in this workbook, which is what we're going to talk about now. So that's 310 CMR 775 9C4. It requires utilities and competitive suppliers, that's you guys, to report their megawatt hours and emissions data. This requirement is satisfied by the completion and submission of the GHG tab, that's tab 14 in the workbook, and the NIPWL GIS settled certificates report as submitted with the workbook. The second report, 310 CMR 775 9C3, those are the regulatory citations for where these reports are required. This requires utilities and competitive suppliers to enter their megawatt hours and carbon dioxide equivalents from the GHG tab onto the second report, the AQ32 spreadsheet and associated form that must be submitted to Mass DEP by the 15th of the second September following each calendar year, about a year and a half after the first report. The 2023 report will be due by 9/15/2025. If you have questions about the completion or submission of these reports, please contact Sue Ann at her email address there on the slide, sueannrichardson@mass.gov, or leave a voicemail at that number and your call will be returned. A couple of other notes about the GHG tab. So you do want to, again, remember to keep the final version. If you receive a corrected version from us, keep that one of the GHG tab because you'll need it in a year and a half after that for the second report, the AQ32. And as far as the completion of the GHG tab is concerned, I have a couple of reminders about that as well. So in the form, you only need to edit the blue boxes, the 9 of them between columns C and K. The information for other non-emitting power in column G is almost never used. You probably will not need to put anything there. It's there in case there are new kinds of certificates and fuel types that we didn't catch ahead of time. It is not the place to put APS certificates that you don't see a box for. You should not report APS certificates on the GHG tab because they are not used for electricity. Other notes. The retail load will be the exact megawatt hour value from the total in column C of the CES tab of the DOER workbook. The 310 CMR 7075 4B requirement to report megawatt hours by emitting and not emitting electricity generators, state, and fuel is satisfied by the submittal of this tab and your settled certificate report. Also, any renewable or clean energy certificates claimed in the GHG tab must be settled in a NAPL GIS Massachusetts subaccount. You must contact MassDEP regarding any eligible. Okay, it's Jason saying he's going to put up the workbook after this, so maybe that's going to be useful to us. Thank you, Jason. If you do have other non-emitting power, you need to contact MassDEP about that before entering the certificates on the GHG tab. Any power that would go in column G that doesn't fall into any of the other categories. The Massachusetts Solar Carve-Out certificates are also RPS Class 1 certificates and should be included in this report. Massachusetts CPS certificates should not be included in the GHG tab. Solar thermal certificates do not generate electricity and should not be included in this report. The same thing is true of APS certificates. They should not be included in this report because they are not used for electricity. An exception to that is fuel cell that do generate electricity. My final note about the GHG tab is just that if you are complying with RPS and CES entirely through ACP payments, then you do not need to fill out the GHG tab. Otherwise, please don't forget to do it. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Matthew. So we'll pull up the workbook to take a look in just a minute. But before we do, here are the appropriate contacts if you have any questions. So for RPS, APS, CPS, you can reach out to John at DOER, and that's doer.rps@mass.gov. And for CES or CESE related questions, or if you need assistance with your ACP payments for MassDEP, you can reach out to myself at climatestrategies@mass.gov, or for the greenhouse gas reporting, you can reach out to Sue-Ann at sueannrichardson@mass.gov. So we're just going to pause for a moment here, and we'll pull up the workbook. And let me just see if we have a question. So there's a question in the chat. Can you make the greenhouse gas notes available? So I would say, I think we can do that, and we'll go over that. If you have more specific questions, we can go over that again when John pulls up the workbook here.
Yeah, we can post they can be posted on MassDEP, but we'll also try to post them on the DOER website where all the compliance information is, where you pick up the workbook, etc. And a recording of this is being made, and the slides will be posted as well. So hopefully we can post the GHG notes there as well. Are there any other questions at this time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to. Have you seen all this?
Yeah. Right here.
Yeah.
All right, we should have the workbook available for your viewing now. Someone wouldn't mind just confirming for us. You can unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Matthew, are you able to see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Thank you. Turn it over to you, John.
Okay, we'll go through the workbook. It's basically the same as last year's, just some of the numbers have changed. But we'll just go through how you fill it out. This is the standard filer info that you put down. The main contact person who's filling out the workbook, a backup person if you have one, and the authorized representative who's going to sign the certification for the workbook. Usually that would be an officer of the company, if somebody has authority to sign on behalf of the company. Then this is where we're entering on the prelim page. This is where we're entering our load obligation. So if you had, I'll just enter 1 million. If you just had one category, one sub-account name or whatever it is. Some suppliers have more than one category. Technically, you were supposed to provide for any sub-account that you have, you should also list it here and the megawatt hours that's associated with it. But this number, again, should equal what the load obligation you receive from DOER. So then these are kind of optional. They're supposed to help you how to use SRAC in case you were using SRAC for class 1, but that's a costly proposition. I would consider these optional. They were there for your benefit, but it's not required to fill these out at this time. Then we go through the next few are the exemption where you would list your load. So I'm just going to enter here that we still have 50,000 contract exemption. And so then it reflects that subject to the total load is 950,000. Again, if you had sub-account, you would fill them out here if there were any exemptions by sub-account. Same for this one's getting a little long in the tooth. There shouldn't be too many contracts or supply before 2013. But if you happen to have any, you would enter that here. This exemption, as we noted before, has actually 3 parts, 2 exemptions, and the final number. So in every one, you would enter the number of contracts you have. In this case, before April 25th, 2014, and then you enter the megawatt hours associated with it here. And then this is the next level. If it was contracts, supply contracts between 14 and 16, you enter the number here and the megawatt here, and the difference will show up over here. There is still a CPS exemption over here. So in case you had a supply contract before January 1st, 2020, you would enter that exemption here, and the net would be shown over here based off the total obligation. These numbers should roll off from the prelim tab, so you don't need to fill this in every time. And that's true of every exemption. It would roll over to the next to be filled in here. The errant, this is where you have errant certificates that say that weren't settled in GIS, or something happened, or some special situation. You would note the certificate type. I think there's a drop-down list of the kind that you're reporting, and then you'd report the, you sort of give a reason over here. I guess it is a drop-down still. If it was unsettled, reserved, settled in the wrong account, sometimes happens, and then you enter the total here, and then these get rolled over to the workbook pages. However, you do have to enter this one again. So we'll look at this first on the RPF class 1. This is being carried over from, let's just say I had an errant, let's call it class 1, and I have 10,000 megawatt hours. Errant, it shows up here, but if we go to this page, it shows up here, but you have to enter those errant certificates again here, and the total should match this number which you entered on tab 4. You see that we entered exemption back on the first tab of 50,000, so it shows up here, and then this is the net. Class 1 gets a little complicated. This is where the exemption comes in. So you're applying 18% to 9,000, which would be your obligation this year of 18% of the total of 50,000 would be 9,000. And then the remainder gets subject to the higher obligation. As I said, 22%. This is the total obligation, but what you're really paying, this is the column that's important because it subtracts out solar carve-out 1 and solar carve-out 2. So this is the net amount that your obligation would be paid upon. And as you see here, since we haven't entered any certificates, we get we would owe completely alternative compliance certificate here. I mean, we could put in, if I had certificates, you see my ACP goes down. This number still matches this one. So we want, I'm gonna enter, let's try. If I enter a higher number, now I'm going to show you. Okay, so we entered that you had 200,000 certificates settled this is what I required. Oh, this is not good. It looks like there's a adding mistake down here. Well, repost that. Don't use the one on the sheet. I'm gonna have to correct this. My reviewers didn't catch this. So now, essentially what happens is, you had excess here. Let's just pretend that these numbers are accurate. You had excess of 25,000. Your limit based on this number was 55, 30% of that was 55,075. So I'm within my banking limit, and I can then turn around and bank the 25,000 count as banking. So we'll fix this and get this updated as soon as we're off. And the other pages are similar. They're all the same. This one has the exemption. We didn't put anything, so nothing's carried over. So you know to $1 million, and based on that, you owe 9,254 certificates is all showing up as ACP because we didn't enter any certificates. So these are all the same. We go through the same exercise. Nothing's changed. Waste energy. APS. CPS. As an exemption. Shows. We go to CES. Just brief explanation. This is the total. The total CES obligation is 26%. So 26% of $1 million is 260,000. But we had a RPS compliance obligation of 218,000. So we net that, which goes to meeting the CES compliance. So then we have a net clean energy standard obligation of 42,000. And that's what it's based upon. Then if you look down here to the, again, we have errors down here. But in this case, the 9,900 should be based on 42,000. Not the 33,000, I believe. And then there would have been, you had room to bank 9,000 CES. Again, we'll fix this as soon as we're off. CESC, where's the page? There we go. CESE, again, we blocked out these because you can't bank anything from CESE. There's no exemption this year. And we show this just in case for our numbers to show if somebody had excess CESE, we just keep track of that number, but it doesn't mean anything. You can't bank, nothing banks here. This would always end up being 0. Here's the GHG tab. Maybe Matt wants to go through this again or talk about some of the notes. I know you can, maybe you want to help drive, or it might make, or some of the notes might make more sense if we're viewing the screen now.
Indeed. Right. So you'll put the name of your entity at the top, and then all of your megawatt hours will go in row 15, which is in blue there. I mentioned column G, eligible certificates from non-emitting electricity generating fuel sources. and the note associated with that, you probably won't need to put anything there. It's just for stuff that doesn't fall into any of the other categories. It is not for the APS certificates, which are in general not included here because they are not used to generate electricity. All of the notes, pretty much all of the notes that I've said are down below this. The biggest advice I can give you as you fill this out is to please read all of them. We always get reports that contain evidence that someone did not read the instructions. So please read the notes. These are all the things I said before. I won't belabor the point any more than that by reading them again out loud now, but know that they're here. And then below the notes is just calculations. So you shouldn't need to do anything down here. It says right there, do not make any changes to the cells below. That's all you need to know about the gray box at the bottom. I think that's all that I'll say in addition about that. Please read the notes. Reach out if you have questions.
Thanks. And just a reminder, this is a required tab to be filled out, so please don't forget filling out the GHG tab. The only voluntary tab to fill out is the following page on green. If you had excess certificates or you're settling them to meet like a percentage goal of your supply, 100% green or 50% green or whatever, you would apply those certificates here. These are not reserve certificates. These would be settled within your GIS report, and you're reporting those certificates here separately. And as I said, these do get reported for reducing a RGGI budget in the future year. But this is the only page that is really voluntary to fill out if you don't have it. Then we go to the ACP page. This shows big numbers because we only showed certificates for RPS class 1. So everything gets carried over here. Table 16A is the RPS, APS, and CPS. This is what is due to Mass CEC, hopefully by June 27th, so everything can be filed on time. The technical due date is July 1st that it should be paid to Mass CEC. And that's the total there. In this case, it'd be 19 million and change that you would wire to Mass CEC by July 1st. Table 16B is the ACP that you would have owed for CES and or CESE. You do not pay this to Mass CEC. You wait for an invoice. This always causes some confusion, but you would wait for an invoice for Mass DEP to invoice you the amount shown there. In this case, a little over $4 million. So it can be a little confusing, but.
And I'll just again put a plug in. If you have questions about the ACP payment process to Mass DEP, feel free to email me, Jason at climatestrategies@mass.gov.
We're almost. These are important pages. This is the certification page. And I believe there are 3 places to sign. The last one for Mass Clean Energy and Mass DEP. And there are 2 signatures here for RPS program too. So just make sure that all three are filled out, dated and signed. The authorization page is, in this box, we want you to put by what authority or authorization are you authorized to sign on behalf of the company. So if you're CFO, just put down, your CFO, or your vice president of the company, or, the board has authorized you to sign on the company's behalf. So that requires just one signature there by the representative. This is tab M. This only shows the RPS, APS, and CPS, ACPs. These numbers are carried over from tab 16. This is what you would send to Mass CEC when you wire your payment. You would email this to, I think we have it somewhere. Yeah, here, to finance@masscec.com. So at the time you send a wire, also email tab N to finance@masscec.com. They will sign this, and this is the payment verification receipt that you get back from them once they sign it. And then you would send this separately on your email to doer.rps.mass.gov when you complete your filing. So that's the only little quirk that we have if you owe a wire payment. And then finally, it's just the contacts again. We'll change those. This can be either Emily Lamb or Jason Brown at Climate Strategies, mass.gov. Sue-Ann Richardson for GHG, or you can send any question or that you have about the workbook or blind filing, send that to doer.rps@mass.gov. So that's going through the workbook. Are there any questions at this time? We'll get this workbook fixed. I've noticed a few. Is this the old one? Here?
I think that's a new question.
Oh,
looks like should be all set. So we'll pause just a moment. If there are any questions, feel free to use the chat or the question and answer tab. And as you go to fill this out, if anything comes up, feel free to email any of these contacts that are on the screen.
no questions? Oh, there's one. Yes, this is being recorded and we will post it to DOER's website. Hopefully today, if not today, certainly by early next week. Any other questions? Yeah, just feel free to reach out if you have anything. The workbook will be posted to the website. Just give me some time to get some fixes in there before you start filling out the workbook. Okay, thank you for your time. And we'll see you next year.